All right. My name is Mouhamad Hamzah Ismail, and today I'm going to be presenting the term project presentation, the one for our CIS-285 class. So, hello to whoever's watching this one, if it's either Professor Tami or Professor Kais. And this video is going to be split into three different parts, one whole video, but three different explanations. And our first explanation is going to be about the logic between the use case flow of event and class diagram. I'm not going to take too much time and get started right in it. So I might not have time to describe everything. However, I'm going to go over the most important parts right now. All right, so let's start with one of our most important use cases, which is the group management, which is a primary operation. And the way the group management works is, so it does have two extents pointing towards it. And these extents aren't necessary, but they're only exceptional flows coming from a use case of remove group member and a use case of add group member. If we go into the scenario of group management, scenarios, we can see that the user in the beginning has to select the group management option. The user then creates a new group by entering group details, and then this is when it correlates with our class diagram. So in the manage groups, that's when all the setters start working. So set member roles, set member name, set member ID, set group description. That's when the user starts using this right here. Then after all the information is entered, the system confirms the creation of the group, which basically works the constructor, manage groups. And then for the other two use cases that extend towards it, for example, the remove group member, this right here, the user accesses the group settings, the user selects a member to remove from the group. For example, this itself correlates well with this function right here, remove group member. It has to take in the constructor, and then from there it clears it out. And that's as far as these three. Also add group member is the same thing. If you want to add a group member, the scenarios, user opens the group management interface, the user selects the group and chooses to add a member. And yeah, these aren't necessary, but they're extensions, so they might be used at any given time. All right, so our next use case that we're going to be talking about is generate report. Again, I don't think I have the time to talk about every one of them, but I will talk about different use cases and types that are happening. So for our generate report, there is another extent that comes towards it, which is an exception that comes from our system backend, and that's not something the user really deals with. However, these exceptions are usually either invalid number types of character or duplicated information. Whatever the user enters that is invalid, that's when the exceptions start working. Now, getting to the scenario of our generate report, as you can see, now if I show you the class itself, reports right here, the one I just clicked on. So generate report, the user chooses generate report feature. The user selects the type of report and specifies the date range. The system generates and displays the report. Okay, so for example, this second one right here, when the user specifies the date range, that's when we get the expense type, which report we're trying to show, get the group names, and then select date range. That's exactly this step 2 inside of our scenario. And then in step 3, the system generates and displays the report. That's when all of our shows start working. So show balance, show date specific report, and that's like the whole report. And then show expense summary, show payments, basically all the reports that are needed. Okay, now, so as far as our payment tracking, the two includes that are coming towards it is one from generate report and one from expense creation. Payment tracking cannot happen unless expense creation happens first. So that's why there's an include pointing towards it. And the way this correlates with our classes is, for example, if we open up payment tracking, we go to scenarios, we get the user accesses the payment, the user records a new payment, and then the system updates the payment history. So this is our payment class right here. And first, the user adds a payment. After the user adds a payment, he can optionally upload a receipt, but that's not important, long since it's an image. This directly is connected to the expense database since it changes data that's already existent in our expense database. And yeah. All right, so that is the just a big chunk of the logic and how it works behind my use cases in correlation with my classes. And right now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the second part of the video, which is basically explain the states in the state diagram. To be more specific, how to connect states to attributes, which we're going to start on right now. So let's start with our first state diagram, which is the create expense state diagram. We initially start from this point right here, and then when the option is selected, the create class automatically creates an empty constructor, which is used for our object. And we go into the state of draft mode. So this is basically nothing is filled up. And what we have to do in order to get to the state of filled is start using our functions, which is set description, set end date, set expense, and set start date. These are all existing functions inside of our class of create expense. After we set all of these, we're into the state of filled. And when we're in the state of filled, we send out our information for basic validation. This validation includes syntax validation or symbols and just problems like that the class itself has a function to catch it so that our whole program won't crash. So if it passes validation, it moves from the state of validation to group assigned. And as it's moving through it, it has to use two different functions. It has to show the groups and show the group members so that the user would have the ability to see what group he wants to pick. And after he chooses what group he wants to pick, we're in the state of group assigned. After we're in group assigned, our last option for the create class object would be setting the split type. So once we set the split type, which is either equally split or split by percentage, we move on to that's the end of the create class actually. And the object moves on to somewhere else, which basically needs, it sends out the peer/admin approval. But that's basically the whole class and the states it goes through. Okay, so now for our second state diagram, which goes off of the manage group class. Again, like the previous one, we start from an initial point, and then from the initial point, we go into draft state. From the draft state, in order to get to the created, we do have to go through these four functions, which are all setters: set the group description, set member IDs, set member roles, and set member names. After those four functions, existing functions are used, and the group is now in state, the state of the class is now created. After it's created, it activates, it automatically activates. So it goes from created state to active state. And then from active state, we do have two options. We can either deactivate the group, which basically the group is no longer working and the expenses are all done and everything, or we can delete the group. From inactive, we can also delete the group or go back to active mode. So once it's inactive, it can go back to active. At the end of the life cycle of the class of the object from class manage group, all ends after it's deleted. It stays in life cycle until we reach deleted, then we go to final. Final is when it no longer exists. Okay, so for now our third and final state diagram, I did choose the class reports for it. We initially start from this point right here, and then from this point we go into two parallel states which have to both be done in order for us to move on, which is date range selected and report type selected. And again, they use existing functions inside the class reports like select date range right here. After we finish these two parallelly, which we have to finish both of them at the same time to move on, we move to report generated. And in order to get to the report generated, we do show the specific report and show expense summary. After we show those two, that's when the report is generated. And then in order to get to report displayed, we do have to go through the four other functions of, that's like the whole report as in displayed. We have to go through the four other functions of show payments, show expenses, and again, show date specific report. We just show it again so we can get to the report displayed, and show balances. After we get through here, that's pretty much the end of the state cycles for reports. And yep, those are all three of our reports, as I just explained right now. And I'm going to move on towards our third part of the video. Okay, so now we're moving on to our third and final part of the video, and I'm going to be explaining in detail each object in the sequence diagram must match a class. In the class diagram, they should be able to explain what scenario is described by the sequence diagram. Now, if I open my project and I immediately start with the expense sequence diagram, first I'm just going to show off every entity, boundary, and control. So the create expenses and payment tracking, those deal directly with the user. That's why they're under boundaries. And their place in the class diagram is right here. So this is the create expenses, and payment tracking will be right here. That's the payment tracking. Now, as far as the notification system and approval review, those are also classes, but they don't deal directly with the user. That's why they're considered as controls. If we want to look at them and see where they exist in the class diagram, this right here is the notification system, and then the approval review is also right here. Okay, now as far as not to mention the expense database is a database. That's why it's considered a entity, and this is where its place is inside of our diagram. Now, as far as to show how it works, basically the user, if he wants to create expense, he sends out and he uses the functions expense creation or delete expense. After these two are made, the create expense sends out admin requests, which work through booleans. They send them out to the approval review. If it's approved, it sends the new data that was added or deleted to the expense database. And then if it wasn't approved, the print approval notification will come out. Either way, the print notification will come out if approved or not. It'll just say if it was approved. As far as the payment tracking, so the user does directly deal with it in case he wants to upload any receipts he paid or add payments he did. And then this payment tracking goes to the expense database directly without approval, since it's the user that is paying, not he doesn't need any approval for paying. And the notification system will be used to send out notifications to every user after anything would be made to the expense database. So the expense database sends out a signal to the notification system that this has been changed or this has been made. And the notification system sends out to everybody in the group notifications in their inbox. And now for our final diagram, we're going to be explaining the user account sequence diagram. This shows the sequences that go in order for a user to create accounts or anything related. The first our boundaries are going to be the create account and login. Again, since these are boundaries only because they deal directly with the user. Our information verifier is going to be considered as our control class. This is because it does not deal directly with the user. And then our database, our account database, is going to be our entity class, since again it is a database. Now, where do these exist inside the class diagram? They are right here. So the create account and the login, the information verifier, and the account database. Those are where they all exist. The way this works is, so if the user wants to just log in, he enters the username, he enters the password. Again, these are all existing operations inside of our classes. And after he enters the username and password, then the login sends the information to verify that these are existing usernames and passwords inside of our account database. If it is true, it lets it through, and if it's not, right here, an error message displays. And the same thing happens with our create account. The user enters a new password, the user enters a new username. After that, it sends it for the information verifier, making sure that these aren't duplicated information. If it lets it through, it lets it through, and if it doesn't, it displays the error message. And that's going to be all for my project. I may have went a little bit over time, but I appreciate your time and I appreciate this whole class and my professors especially. And thanks. I'm looking forward to the feedback for sure.